All right guys, welcome back. In this video, we're gonna talk about how to zero your thermal scope. So this process really applies to right now our adder series, as well as our varmint series and our rattler series. Now the menus and how they function inside each of these thermal devices can vary a little bit, especially depending on what firmware you might have installed or updated on the device, but the process is largely the same. So basically we're doing the same thing whether you're using an adder, a rattler, or a varmint. Zeroing a thermal scope is going to be pretty simple across the board. So in this case, we're going to do it on the adder today. And you follow these steps, make a little bit of adjustments and tweaks if you're using a rattler or a varmint, but the steps are going to be pretty close. The menu functions are going to be identical with what you need to do to get these things to zero. Keep in mind when you're zeroing a thermal scope, there are some similarities between doing a scope, especially the adder. You might see knobs and adjustments, but it is a computer. There is an LCD screen, so it is a digital process. So instead of adjusting clicks and making your crosshair, if it's etched glass, reticles, or whatever else you might have on your regular day scopes, instead of moving your dot or crosshair left or right, windage and elevation, we're basically looking at pixel by pixel increments of your digital crosshair and moving it towards your point of impact when you're zeroing. We'll go ahead and guide you through this process so that you'll understand it more fully. All right, so I've got a few things here before we get into showing you how to zero a thermal scope. You might be able to just take it out to the range, find some heat signature, but you'll learn real quickly if you're looking at paper, you're not gonna see the same, you're not gonna see the same zeroing marks, right? Some people will use tinfoil, some people will use various objects that vary in temperature so that you can easily identify what you're aiming at. Every thermal scope right now ships with our AGM targets. These are essentially sticky backing targets you can place over paper, and they do a pretty good job at showing up. Essentially, this matte finish black attracts light and therefore attracts heat in a different way than this reflective tinfoil-y kind of material over here. So this will show up semi-decently. A lot of guys, when they go out and zero their scopes, will get hot hands or some kind of a pocket warmer like this. Go ahead and open it up, shake it up, give it some time, and it will get substantially warmer than everything else. So these really show up really well. One downside of using these is usually if you stick them to a surface, if they sit there long enough, especially if it's thin paper or cardboard, it will heat up the paper or cardboard as well. And then you kind of get this large heat blob that you're looking at, and that can be a little bit difficult if you're looking for a really precise zero. So if you have a high-end thermal scope, 384, 640 resolution, and you want to make sure you're really dialed in tight, that might not be the best way to do it, but a lot of people do it that way. One tip that you can use, I call this the box method. Basically, you get a cardboard box like this, cut a small hole in it here, and you will mount or tape, I guess, this pocket warmer on your backing just like this, so that there's some space floating around, but that way you're only looking through the hole right here that you cut to about 1 inch big, and that gives you a really hot, precise point of aim that you can easily identify. Another cool thing that you'll notice when zeroing is that the surface temperature can often change when a bullet passes through it. Often it is the case when you're shooting, especially if it's really thick cardboard, it will heat up the point of impact. So you will see your impacts and you will see just the distortion in temperature of the surface of this cardboard flat box right here. Same goes with paper targets, but this is a really good method. This is maybe kind of a pro method if you're looking for a really hot, small point of aim. And we're gonna go ahead and basically do both. I'm gonna go ahead and go out to the range today. We're gonna stick this over this and cut a hole so that you can see in the camera the reflective difference on the thermal targets, but you will see a spot that is glowing hot white, and we're gonna go ahead and go out to the range and zero. All right guys, so now we're out at the range. We're gonna go through this process. contrary to popular belief, sometimes you talk to people who are getting into thermal and you don't realize you can actually zero your scope during the day. It's not really going to be a problem. What you don't want to do is pick conditions where the environment is a similar temperature to bodies, right? So if it's 100 degrees out, warm bodies are close to 100 degrees out, you're not going to see like the pocket warmers in this case. You're not going to see targets that well. It's all going to be pretty monochromatic. As you can see for us right now, it's really freaking cold, so this is gonna work really well. Our hot hands are on the target. They're showing up really, really well in this. So we're pretty close. We're not that far. I'm just close here to show you kind of how this process works, and we'll go ahead and go through it. So if you notice, I've got two things on my target out there. That's the hole we cut in the box. And on the opposite side, on the back wall, I've got the hot hands. And you can see that nice, bright, hot square that gives me a nice, precise point to aim and shoot at. Down below is our tinfoily thermal target. And I mean, it does an okay job at, you know, contrasting with the dark parts and the reflective parts and kind of picking up heat in a different way. But I think a superior method is still just using good tried and true hot hands if you have them. So this is a pretty easy setup. I'm gonna go through some of the functions of this scope. All right, so if you go ahead and press and hold, there are two things you need to be looking at when you're zeroing your scope. I mean, it comes down to essentially two functions in here. One is your zeroing profile. So if you notice here, it is on profile A. So if I press and hold, let me get that back. All right, so if I press, now it's on profile B, C, there's D, and then E, and then back to A. So I've got a couple of profiles that I can basically save zeros onto this scope. Now within each zeroing profile, if I come into my reticle, I'm on profile A, and you can actually note that in the top right corner, you'll see A2 at 100 yards. If I go ahead and press this, that 2 is because I'm on zeroing, at the very top, zeroing subset 2. So if I click that, you'll notice I've got 3, 4, 5, off, if you want to not have a reticle, and then back to 1. So I have 5 zeroing profiles within category A, and then I've got A, B, C, D, and E. So you essentially have 25 zeroing options on your thermal scope, which is pretty helpful depending on what you're doing. On the Adder series, switching from A to B is as simple as just pushing the button. So if I want to zero at 100 yards on profile A, but I leave it zeroed to the same gun, but change my zero to 400 yards on profile B, I could essentially call in a dog, and if I see one at 400 yards, I could click a button, and now I've swapped to my 400 yard zero and take shots even further. So depending on how you want to set it up, you could also set it up for multiple guns and calibers. So if they come with the AGM mount, it's QD. So if I want to throw this on, this is a 308, if I want to throw it on an AR-15 or a bolt gun or whatever else, I could basically have all my rifles calibrated and zeroed on this scope as I pass it around between guns. So really awesome feature. We're gonna go ahead and leave it on number 2. This next part here, this is your distance. This is feedback to you, the shooter. This number will appear in your top right corner of the screen here. You'll see A2-100 yards. This is telling me that I've zeroed this specific profile and subset to 100 yards. I can change this to whatever I prefer, whatever I want to zero it with. This isn't like a tracking system though, so this doesn't mean I have to zero this at 100 yards. This is just a feedback loop I'm giving myself essentially, okay? Under type, these are the crosshair types. So we were on 1, here's 2, here's 3, there's 4, and there's 5 on this adder, and back to 1. We'll go ahead and leave it on 1 in this case. We're gonna go to color. Right now it's on white. I think a more accurate way to describe this is to actually maybe call it contrasting. It's white when it hovers over darkness, and it's black in the areas it hovers over warmer surfaces. So if you notice, as I pull this crosshair over to the middle there, the center is now black. If I move it up here where this target's a little warmer, the crosshair is black over the white. So it's going to basically just always be the opposite of whatever you're looking at. And For me, this is the one I prefer because I could always pick it up no matter what, you know, if I'm black hot, white hot, it'll always do that kind of mirroring, contrasting thing for me. If I go to my other colors here, you've got green. It's nice and bright and vibrant. A lot of guys like that. Red, I probably wouldn't stick with red unless I was running black hot, where the majority of the background would be white because the red shows up better there. And then you've got black. Again, most people don't prefer black, but if you're looking at mostly white, if you've got your brightness turned up because that's how you want to run it, you can do it in black. We're going to go back to white because that's how I prefer it. This is just an indication of what I'm zooming this, or what my zoom is for this zeroing process. This freeze function I'm going to come back to in the zeroing process. It's a really helpful tool, and we'll explain that. So down here, this is essentially your windage and elevation, your X and Y. So this is a common, you see this in math, Cartesian coordinate system, common grid. X is your left and right, or windage, and Y is going to be your elevation, or up and down. So plus and minus, it's pretty simple. 0 and 0 is at the center point, or the origin in this case. Because it's a digital scope, how we do this is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and take a shot. Let's try to hold kind of center here. All right, so you'll notice where the target is actually warmed up, where the round passed through the cardboard, and now it's cooling off. So if you look, it's a couple inches left and a couple inches down. Traditional scopes, you would move the impact to your crosshair. So you would adjust things. It needs to come, you know, right a few MOA or up a few whatever, or mils, depending on what you're running. With thermal, the process is basically the opposite. So you want to move your crosshair to your impact, right? So in this case, what we'll do is I will place my crosshair where I was, and this is I'm going to come back to this freeze function. All right. I've frozen the image so that now as I'm moving around, I can make adjustments. And because this is a thermal and this is a digital display, we have this tool available to us that makes it super easy. So essentially, I hit this XY value now, and I bring the crosshair over to my impact. Just because I held a little bit more center, I'm gonna leave it there in this case, because when I hit freeze, I wasn't where I was pointing when I pulled the shot, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring this down. I think my up and down was pretty close. All right, press and hold, hit OK. All right, we're back to it. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put around dead center. All right. Let's try shooting our square right down here. All right, you see my impact there. I'm pretty much on, right? Pretty simple process. So that is what we refer to in this industry as a one-shot zero. Unlike, I mean, what I would probably do is take more shots. It is a firearm. There is shooter error, as you can see, right? I'm zeroing very close. So normally you're probably going to zero a little bit further out. So take a few shots, get a nice tight group, move your crosshair over, and the process is that simple. All right, guys, so that is how you zero your thermal scope. In this case, it was the adder. Again, it's a very similar process, whether you're using a Rattler or a varmint thermal scope. The menus might be a little bit different. The button layouts are different. And depending on what firmware update, there might be some small differences, but the basics of it is pretty much the same. You're moving your pixels of the crosshair, and you're basically moving it to your group that you're zeroing at. It's a really simple process. So if you have any questions about this process, feel free to drop a comment. We'll do our best to answer those. We're gonna do a lot more videos like this, so stay tuned and we'll see you next time.